Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another Seasons on Saturday. This is actually part 7. I have to say that because we tend at our age to forget how many parts we've done. But last time we spoke and reviewed the launch of the Genuine Imitation Life Gazette and what the happenings were that led up to that in 1968. So today we've got with us Anthony Colatrella from New Jersey and Mike Derrico. And we have apologies from Dominic Paradise and Lee Shapiro, who couldn't make tonight's performance. But as this was the sort of dire end of the group's period, I suppose we're all reaching a point of weakness ourselves in the whole story of what they did, and it's taken a lot of research to get us to where we are. So we're at the midpoint in 1968 when all the efforts were going into Genuine Imitation Life Gazette with Bob Gaudio leading that production. But I discovered that at the same time there were also other recording sessions going on, and it's a very confusing scenario in terms of the group. Obviously, Bob Gaudio had made the decision to change their sound, but they hadn't quite abandoned it, given the release of Electric Stories, which was recorded in October 1968 and did make a decent performance on Cashbox. But what do you, Anthony, remember of that period in terms of what people felt about the Four Seasons sound?
Well, let's see. It sort of was a little bit of an uncertain period. I mean, they had done very well in 1967, and then they sort of went. I think we discussed this actually in the last session, that they sort of gave a little bit of a token gesture to the hippie generation at the time with "Watch the Flowers Grow," which was a little bit of a departure for them. It wasn't a dramatic departure, but a little bit. A side note: at the time, I became acquainted for various reasons with Mike Petrillo. He's also a Belleville resident, and
Right.
he had written songs he actually played with the Seasons. He played sax on some of their records, and he became one of their songwriters. Him and Chubby Staffelli, they had written "Tell It to the Rain," and I remember when that record "Watch the Flowers Grow" came out, and he asked my friend and I, who were with him at the time, what we thought of it, and we thought, it's a little different, but pretty good song. And he said, "Oh, I don't like it at all. I don't know why they released it." That was his opinion. So
was a song he either loved or hated.
Right? Yeah.
Lee's opinion on it, because he spoke about that last time. But
I think it only sort of made it into the 30s.
It was still adventurous vocals and quite musical arrangement. So it wasn't much different than, say, a Beatles or a Beach Boys type experiment.
Yeah. But then after that, they reverted back to what? "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow," which was more of their, typical sound. Great cover, but, more of the sound. But then they went back and did "Electric Stories," which was very different, certainly, than "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow." Actually, that was a Mike Petrillo song.
Yeah.
He wrote that with Sandy Linzer. They had actually left Bob Crew and went out on their own, and I think they were working at Epic. And he said he wrote that. He wasn't thinking of the Four Seasons at all. They wrote it for some group that was with Epic. Don't recall who it was, but somehow Frankie Valli heard it, or Bob Gaudio heard it, and they decided they would record it.
Charles Calello said that they were very optimistic about it, and it was an arrangement he really liked, and they thought it was going to be a big success. But getting to 40 in a chart or 38, isn't
Yeah.
isn't a success as far as they and Phillips were concerned.
Yeah,
So
it was played very little in the New York City area.
yeah, they tried Saturday's Father, which we talked about before.
Right, and then Saturday's Father,
Yeah, and
which
that
was
was progressive, but with still Frankie's falsetto. But once they were once they were recording in 1968, they recorded a number of songs which showed a sort of a lack of direction. Or
direction.
A Face Without a Name was recorded in November 68. That was eventually released after re-recording in March 69. To Make My Father Proud, again, recorded and then re-recorded. Natural Morning was recorded and remains unreleased until the box set comes out. We had to recover that song from Artie Schrock from his collection. And then there was a song called Alone Again, which I think Artie wrote, but has never surfaced. It was on a box that didn't have the right tape in, and so we never found it in the.
They should have added Naturally to the end, and then it would have been a big hit for them.
Yeah, and they did I Was a Baby or I Was a Boy.
Yeah.
Well, same tape, and You've Got Your Troubles. That would be eventually released after re-recorded in March 69. So, yeah, they were still scraping into the bottom of the charts when they recorded and released the Girl I'll Never Know,
Yes.
which did pretty well and was a great performance by Frankie. Good arrangement.
Yeah, I was in I was going to school in Philadelphia at the time, and I went to see them at the Academy of Music in Philadelphia, and it was either late 69 or very early 70. And Frankie sang that. He said, "This is my latest single," and of course he did a very good job. And it was a fair hit in the Philadelphia area, as I recall.
Yeah, well, obviously, A Face Without a Name and Dream of Kings followed during 1970.
70.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they've been recorded earlier. And Bob Guardio said in an interview that A Dream of Kings, which was for the movie,
Yeah.
was a big mistake. And
I wonder what he meant by that.
Because they chose not to include it in the film.
Well, yeah, that's right. It was recorded for the film, but they didn't include it in the film. But I think it was on the soundtrack.
It was, yeah, and it was a special mix single release on Philips, but with little.
So maybe that was the mistake, that it was released as a single. I'm not sure what he meant. What was the mistake specifically?
Well, yeah, you have to. He doesn't fully. I mean, this is part of. The more we know, the more questions we have. But we never know the full background because nobody is explaining the relationship of the group with Philips at this time.
And that was released with You've Got Your Troubles. And was it supposed to be which was the A side?
well, yeah, that was the problem with Philips at this point in time. I mean, obviously by the time they got to the turn of the year in 68 into 69, they had the big push on Edition Doro, which we spoke about, and that was, Philips making the changeover to stereo on albums, and wanting the Four Seasons in the best stereo mixes. Well, the strangest thing about this was when we started the research for the Snapper box set, we actually found a tape, which is Bob Crew with his engineer going through master tapes and listening to snatches of stereo mixes that had been done. And all the unique stereo mixes that went into Edition Doro were found during this session. Now, why that's survived in the Four Season storage, whereas none of the multi-tracks, none of the stereo mixes have done, is another question. Why is there so much stuff missing, and where could it possibly be? Without anybody opening up, well, we don't really know. But of course, 1969 came, And although everybody was buying Edition Adoro for the Christmas season because it was released just the right time, out comes Genuine Imitation Life Gazette. And the promo went into that as well. But basically,
that seemed to have been a promotion or a marketing error to me, because Edizione Doro was all their previous gold hits.
So it reinforced the sound and the connection.
Yeah, and then when Genuine Imitation Life Gazette, I mean, it sort of really made the difference, the change seems so drastic, so dramatic.
Yeah.
That I, to fans, they had just been listening to Doro, and then they hear this.
We talked about Life Gazette last time.
Yeah, right.
We know where it ended up, but the result was that their career went off a cliff as far as Philips are concerned. We don't really know what the relationship was with Philips. Does anybody? Do you know, Mike, anything about the Philips relationship?
This is a learning session for me. I'm taking this all in. To me, this whole period is a mystery.
Right. Okay. Hello, Chuck. Welcome. We finally got you at last. And so,
good morning.
Welcome to the add-on to the group chat that we started last Saturday, and you're now contributing into the video cast that it's going to be published. So let's pick up on your thoughts about what was the feelings about the Four Seasons and their direction immediately after the failure of Genuine Imitation Life Gazette, which we talked about in the previous seasons on Saturday.
I really, when it came out, I didn't know how to take it. It was so different than the seasons. The seasons had a formula of all their other singles were being very, very similar to each other, and Genuine Imitation Life was a reach out. I saw some of the promotion that they had on TV and the various shows they were on with songs like Saturday's Father and some of the other ones, and it just didn't sound like the seasons. I was wondering what direction they were going, and it became obvious to me afterwards, not really during the Genuine Imitation Life, but with some of the records that they were coming out with afterwards, that they clearly were trying to deal with the changes in music in the American music scene. The music that we had grown up with in the late 50s and through the 60s was totally changing, and you had folk rock and you had soul and R&B coming out more strongly than it was ever before, and the Four Seasons sound wasn't fitting into that gender. So I think they were probably trying to experiment and come up with some sounds that would relate to the record buying public and would be consistent with what people were listening to at that time. And some of the later songs after that clearly were more focused on what was generally being heard on the airwaves at that time. They did come up with some.
Well, did they really need to change? Because
they came up with some reach back. And that reminds me was kind of a.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but just to pick up on one of the points you said there. I mean, I've been listening to the mono archive that we collected together, and listening to it, you get to 66, 67, and you can hear the R&B, and you can hear the influence of horns. And I've got an interview with Frankie Valli saying that's what we introduced more, because that was the fundamental part of the soul sound, particularly the stack sound. And brass was very much the influence in 65 and 66 in the soul sound that was emerging in different parts of America. They used it, and then suddenly you get to the single release of Saturday's Father, and everything just drops off the cliff in terms of a recognizable Four Seasons sound, even though they were changing direction. But at the same time, there were other groups like the Tokens, the Happenings, Jay and the Americans, Brooklyn Bridge. They were all experimenting, but they were keeping harmony.
They all you could tell that their sounds were, you could recognize the group. The early Four Seasons sounds up through Edizione d'Oro. You could recognize all the singles in the first two bars. Immediately you knew it was a Four Seasons song. And a lot of that you could also recognize in some of the songs by the Tokens, Jay and the Americans, Brooklyn Bridge. They had that unique sound of their group that you could hear. With the new stuff that was coming out from the seasons after Genuine Imitation Life, it didn't have a hook like those earlier songs had.
That's right.
That got you in with the sound. You knew it was your group that you wanted to listen to. It was something different, and you if the DJ on the radio wasn't telling you who it was, you didn't even know who it was.
Well, do you think the missing factor was Bob Crewe? Because Bob Crewe knew how to get a hook in the opening part of the song, and there's nothing.
I think that was part of it. Bob Crewe was unique. I mean, he could listen to something and he could develop a sound. And if you listen to his music from the late 50s through what we're talking about now, most of it you could tell was Bob Crewe productions. He just had that sound that was unique to Bob Crewe.
Well, he always captured the listener's attention in the opening bar, either with a drum beat or a guitar riff.
There was something in the song which caught your attention, and you listened to, and you got that. I like that song.
And it had a momentum to it. Whereas, Saturday's Father is a 45 release.
It's flat, very flat. It just doesn't go anywhere.
Subject, yeah. So I don't think they needed to change. And when I picked up on the other singles, listening to the mono archive in the order of release, and you get Something's on Your Mind and Idaho, both of them fail to capture the attention in the opening bars. They're just.
I always laughed at Idaho. I thought Idaho was a kind of a comedy song. It just wasn't a song that fit them.
Yeah, but then obviously Phillips lost complete faith in them, and the only information we had up until we did the research project was that the Phillips records show that they obviously did Electric Stories, and I think Electric Stories was the last 45 in the 60s I got to hear by the Four Seasons in the UK.
Probably so,
I thought that was progressive, but I had nothing after that. I didn't get to hear On That Reminds Me. I didn't know about Half and Half or any of those. But when I've done the research over the past 20 years, I found A Face Without a Name, To Make My Father Proud. In the research, we found Natural Morning, and I know there are 2 tracks, Alone Again, and I Was a Baby, or I Was a Boy, listed in the Phillips archive, which we thought we'd found, but ended up not being in the tape box they were marked as. So they were experimenting in all sorts of ways in late 68 and into 69, but none of it seemed to get much airplay. I didn't even get to hear The Girl I'll Never Know when it was released in the UK. And obviously we never had A Dream of Kings.
No, I thought that was one of their better offerings of that period of time. It had that,
Valli had
that mellow sound of Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
Do you think Valli had stopped trying to be Frank Sinatra and decided?
I think he still wants to be Frank Sinatra today. Yeah, no,
he was doing pop again, wasn't he? Rather than
well, he was doing pop because that's where the money was.
Yeah, that's right.
The American music market was changing. In the 60s, the pop, the Sinatras and that sound was still selling a lot of single records. But as you moved in the 70s, the transition was almost totally to the teen market. Well, in buying the singles, and the older artists were relegated to the albums.
Yeah. Well, do you think that the radio changes that happened in the late 60s in America changed the ability of artists to achieve success?
It split up the market. You used to have, until that point in time, you had AM rock. You had the daytimers, the smaller stations, which played a more variety, and then you had the big, massive stations, which played formula music. But when the American FCC required the radios to have both AM and FM tuners in them, the FM market took off, and you actually got more music and more of a diversity, and you could hear more on the FM stations. An interesting sidebar to that. The DJ I knew in Portland at the time was switched from AM, the morning AM station to FM. Yeah. And he was a friend of mine, and he was helping to try and create the FM market, they were selling add-on tuners for your car. So he put an add-on FM tuner in my car so I could listen to him. It was much better music. It was more music and less advertisements, and it was you got, I think, the DJs that had a wide perspective of what was changing took a risk and played some of the stuff that the formula stations would have never played. And that's how we got some of the groups that we got during that period of time, because the public liked them and their sound took off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Valli's efforts on, in terms of vocal performance, were still great on things like A Face Without a Name and Dream of Kings. Bill Engler actually replenished and reset the stereo catalogue for Bob Gaudio and the Four Seasons Partnership in '88 with those versions. So it was a crucial issue, and it's one of the reasons why it was important to get it into the box set, and we researched it. But I've got no faith that the version that's going to come out is going to match the quality of the vinyl that I've got. But we'll have to wait and see what Snap would produce. But it's
I've always felt that Edizione d'Oro, the gold hits, was the cornerstone or the classic of all the season music. It had
it was a defining, it was a defining album.
Defining album, yeah. And there's been probably 5 or 10 different versions of it come out since then.
It was re-released in '72 in the UK, and I got an absolutely high quality UK pressing, because UK pressings tended to be higher quality than many of the US pressings.
Oh, very definitely, yeah.
And it was my master of Four Seasons albums right the way through the '70s and '80s until CD came out. So it's an important cornerstone album in this box set. But the most important thing was whether the Four Seasons had a future identity after that, because we never say that's defining, but they tried to come back with "And That Reminds Me," and obviously it had the elements of the original formulas in that, and it was an old track redone.
Very old, yeah, a pre-war track.
Yeah.
Ken, the seasons always had a problem. I might be using the correct word, but they were always older than their record buying public that they were targeting. And they tried to mask that image of being the parental generation versus the teeny bopper generation.
Yeah.
And by the time the late '60s and early '70s had come, there were so many young groups coming out of different parts of the country that the teens were relating to more so than a group that, when they saw their picture, looked like, wow, that's mom and dad. It's very, very different. And they related that music to the older music. They probably related some of it. I mean, I enjoyed the music, so I don't that wasn't me, but a lot of people I can remember talking to, just they didn't relate to the season music. It was old music. It wasn't new music. That didn't have the creativity and the
no, it didn't relate back to the formula that Charles Galella talks about in his book. That they used, which was so much built around his ability as a arranger. And
well, his ability as a arranger was incredible. If you look at all of his stuff, really probably starting with Dawn, where it really started that formula, I think. They all are very consistent. And Lee Shapiro's comment on they all had the same 3 chords. If you look at the chord base, theirs was unique, with the exception of, I think, The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore. They all start out with the same 3 chords, even through Who Loves You and Don't, December '63. It's all the same, and you can just pick it up just like that.
Yeah. Well, obviously,
it must have been good. I mean, I suspect Philips was wavering in their commitment a little bit because of the changing times, but they still, had enough interest to put out another album after Genuine Imitation Life Gazette.
Well, in the meantime, because the seasons must have had problems with them, they turned to Bob.
Yes, they went to Crew, on the Crew label for it, and that reminds me. I thought that was kind of strange. I always wondered at the time. Well, I got sort of said, oh, they must have left Phillips without any kind of announcement, and they didn't have another label, so Crew made his own label for them.
Well, yeah, Crew made his own label.
But did he have any,
we don't know or understand. Maybe I'll find out more about that if I speak to Gary Knight, and he can pitch in some of the issues that Bob Crew had towards the end of the 60s, because obviously he was building up to a major crash with two aspects of his life.
Yes,
was
right.
The collapse of his companies, which he was, Dan Crew, his brother, was administering and managing with him, and also his drugs and alcohol problems, which seemed to have come to a head at that time. But notwithstanding that, he was still doing stuff with the group, and obviously him and Bob Audio put all the efforts into, and that reminds me, and it was a success.
I thought that was actually mostly Benny Randell who's that was due to, and that reminds me.
Yeah, and also they picked up a song from Bob Crew, the Singles Game, which had been written a couple of years earlier.
Larry Brown.
Yeah, Larry Brown. It was a leftover from the time with Larry Brown in '67. So what they were faced with, Phillips wanted to put something out in stereo and wanted to invest, and they realized that obviously the group had to have a sort of mature image, and a cover and album that would impress at first sight. So we had the highly embossed gatefold album that became Half and Half. And there's a lot of things right and wrong about Half and Half. Most of them wrong. The cover's great.
Yeah,
we're gonna do a special session on covers and production in the future.
We better have Chuck available for that.
Yeah, well, Chuck's just said very little info at that time on the West Coast. Singles Game was also done by JM Techniques.
Oh, it was a good point for Chuck. Yeah, picking that up. Yeah, Jay and the Techniques had picked up that song from Bob Crew a year earlier, and that's actually quite a popular song on the Northern Soul scene. Well, in the UK.
This is the album, and I was frankly disappointed. When you look at it, it doesn't. First of all, it took me a while to buy it. I didn't buy it when it first came out because there's nowhere on the outside that it tells you what the songs are, so you had no clue what was on it. Yeah. And they didn't even have a sticker on the top of the album that said you got to buy this because it's got these latest hits in it. It was just like, well, it's an album. And when you opened it up and looked at it, the songs that were on it, really none of them were songs that I can recall as being songs that got a lot of airplay that you remembered. They were all either new songs or songs with the exception of, and that reminds me that I'd never heard.
Well, and, I mean, there were a couple of really original songs on it.
There were. Unfortunately, where I lived, we never heard them on the radio. I never heard them until I played the album.
Well, I didn't either. I didn't hear any of this because I was trying to get qualified and bringing up a young family at the time. I'm moving house, but in retrospect, as soon as I heard the album, Patch of Blue and She Gives Me Light stood out as being
they do stand out.
Classic Four Seasons sounds.
The one that that seems outside the typical season sound is the last cut on side 2, and that Any Day Now, Oh Happy Day. It seems like they're trying to change their sound. It just doesn't fit their model.
It's a bit of a mismatch, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
They actually did it in concert as well, but I've not heard a recording of that. But the obvious failure of that album created a lot of conflict between them and Phillips. But even so, they were still recording stuff, and Crew was back working with them again and trying to get stuff. because we've got tracks like One Man, and in my recent research, we found 2 vocals, although I believe there may be more there on 16 track. We've got One Man, but we've also now got Need to Get to Know You and The Goose That Laid the Golden Egg, which are very diverse tracks. But also we found a recording of Just How Loud, which was a Joanne Morgan track that Loring and Schrock had recorded in 1966, being done by Frankie in a very strange arrangement. That was happening, and then Phillips decided to put out Heartaches and Raindrops and Lay Me Down, Wake Me Up, and then finished with Where Are My Dreams, all of which are great sounding tracks and echo in a sort of a new Four Seasons style, but
they have, as we talked earlier, the expansion to tracks which had more of the brass sound and the percussion in them.
Yeah.
They have all of those tracks have that extended instrumentation.
Yeah.
And like most groups were going, early Four Seasons, you could see the 4 guys and the drummer were the act. But one thing, one of the releases from the Half and Half album, which is I've always felt unique, one of the single releases, The Circles in the Sand.
Yeah.
The flip side of that was My Mother's Eyes from the old solo album, the original Phillips album. And I always found that to be odd, because typically when they would release a single, the flip side would always be something which was written by their organization, so they got the royalties of it too, for the writing side too.
Yeah.
And this was unique, and I'm wondering if Phillips at that time, who probably made the decision on the flip side more so than Crew or Gaudio, if they were still trying to merchandise Valli as a crooner, a Sinatra style singer, rather than, because nothing else was working.
That's a fair point.
I've always wondered about that.
That's a fair point. And obviously, when Phillips asked them to produce this album, Bob Gaudio was a bit stuck because he didn't have the songs, and he was scrambling around to get high quality productions organized, because obviously some of the productions they weren't happy with from earlier, so they re-recorded a number of songs that they'd salvaged over the previous years from the sessions I just spoke about. But they were also throwing together stuff at the time.
He didn't really, if you look at that Half and Half album, Gaudio really didn't contribute any of it, did he? One song, which I don't know where it came from, it was him and Jake Holmes, this Morning After Loving You, Gaudio and Holmes. Was that left over? Yeah, was that left over from?
That was left over before Genuine. It didn't fit on Imitation Life Gazette.
Right, and I guess it didn't fit with Watertown either.
Well, you just didn't Mike Petrillo also contribute to that album?
Patch of Blue, great song.
Blue, what a great song!
I thought it was it was sort of in the mid 60, 65, 67 style. I thought it was great, but unfortunately it went nowhere. In
the research of the tapes, I found a tape box which indicated there were 15 takes of Patch of Blue, and the last one was circled as the one to be found. But the only thing I did find was a mono version without the falsetto interlude. So it's clear that what Bob Crew thought was, we've got to give this a sort of a jump start, like jumpstarting your car, and in the middle of the latter part, you've got this falsetto interlude with Frankie Valli coming in and doing his high falsetto from 1964.
Oh, I love that interlude.
Break everybody's listening and sort of put them in the zone. Right. And it goes into fade out. But it was
beautiful. It
should have been a successful single. But my thoughts are that if they put the worst Four Seasons song ever is on the Half and Half album. Is anybody?
Sorry? Yeah, that is sorry.
Sorry is just downright
sorry.
diabolical.
It's
Yeah,
it's a very appropriate title.
It just rips a hole in the middle of an otherwise pretty damn good album.
Were they sorry for including it? they were apologizing for it. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to know the timeline, but if they'd put Natural Morning on, which was in the vault, or they'd pulled off one of these two unheard songs, I Was a Boy, or they could have put A Face Without a Name on it. But obviously they needed something Seasons to complete the half.
There is a CD of Half and Half from Ace, and they do have A Face Without a Name on
I know
CD.
it wasn't released.
No, you're right. It was
and there's no stereo version of it because the tape that's lost has got the stereo version on it, the original recording. So I actually did a DES mix of that song because it's such a great song, a fantastic arrangement. But they got a number of arrangers working on
all different arrangements
because I think you had 4 or 5 different arrangers: Charles Colella, Bob Scott, Bob Gaudio.
I think it's Joe Scott, isn't it? Joe Scott.
Oh, Joe Scott. Sorry. Yeah. And the album got to a distressing 190 in the album charts. So I didn't pick it up till 1976 and thought, it was awesome in some of the tracks, but Circles in the Sand, a Laura Narrow song. Well, no, sorry, that wasn't Laura, wasn't it? It was the other
Emily.
Emily was the Laura Narrow song.
Yeah, I don't know who wrote Circles in the Sand. It was somebody I never heard of.
No, somebody obscure,
So one thing, one of the releases from the Half and Half album, which is I've always felt unique, one of the single releases, the Circles in the Sand.
Yeah.
The flip side of that was My Mother's Eyes from the old solo album, the original Phillips album. And I always found that to be odd because typically when they would release a single, the flip side would always be something which was written by their organization, so they got the royalties of it too, for the writing side too.
Yeah.
And this was unique, and I'm wondering if Phillips at that time, who probably made the decision on the flip side more so than Crew or Gaudio, if they were still trying to merchandise Valli as a crooner, a Sinatra style singer, rather than, because nothing else was working.
That's a fair
I've always wondered about that.
That's a fair point. They were digging around trying to find songs to put on that album, but finishing with the Any Day Now.
Yes, Happy Day.
Happy Day.
Happy Day
was something that it finished on a pretty high in terms of keeping the Four Seasons sound at least in existence, because my thoughts are that Bob Gaudio killed the Four Seasons sound with Genuine Imitation Life Gazette.
Yeah.
And,
I don't know if this would have helped the success of Half and Half at all, but I think the record would have been much better served if it had been a Frankie solo record. And you lose a few of those songs, and just it's a much stronger record as a Frankie Valli album.
And it's part of the progression of his solo material that leads into Motown. And we know that now. We know that from the unreleased tracks, and we know that from the 2 albums that were released from Motown. So we start to see a picture of Frankie Valli, the mature solo performer at the peak of his vocal ability.
Yeah, and Chuck's just added that Emily was likely a Colello suggestion as he produced original for Laura Nyro.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
How about, was this just a rumor that they actually is supposed to do another album for Phillips?
No,
but maybe.
No, it's not a rumor. I think it's pretty factual because, I worked hard to try to find out what had happened at the end of Phillips' period, because Charles Alexander had been told by Bill England when they were doing the Jersey Beat Boys box set that they'd recorded and partially completed several tracks at Philips. And when I was speaking to Bill Inglett and trying to just get more Unreleased out for the box set, I was aware of the fact that they'd recorded a number of things at this stage. And there are 3 tapes of transfers from 16 track that Bill Inglett sent over to us as scans. But there was 16 track, and everything else that he'd sent to us was 2 track stereo. So anything that was on 16 track needed to be mixed down. And that was engineering time. And, you know, the payment for this job was a fee.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me that there were only 2 of these 25 tracks that were transferred that have vocals on them. And that was some tracks at the time. And that was Need to Get to Know You, a Krug Audio composition, and The Goose That Laid the Golden Egg, a Sandy Linzer composition. But I thought to myself, why would Ken Roberts have transferred all of these Philips reels as instrumental only? And I questioned him about it. And then in the push to get the last of the tracks down, and of course on this, you've got to remember the story of Frankie Valli stood up and said at the show that there was a Bobby Darin composed song that was going to be their next single. And they actually brought out Where Are My Dreams instead. Mm-hmm. So if he was saying that this is our next single, he must have put a vocal down for it.
And so, Chuck said Bill Inglott told me there was about enough for a half album finished and not released when working on ED for Ace. I don't know if that's...
Well, he said to me that there's only 2 and he mixed them down. So he had to put that time in. But maybe he wasn't prepared to put any more time in, because what I found out was that one of the songs, Just How Loud, which was a Loring
Artie Schreck
composition, which he'd recorded on John Morgan in 1966. That was he had an acetate of it, and that acetate's in the box set. Sent it over to us, so he digitized that. So there was a vocal done. So they wouldn't have copied these tracks across as instrumentals if there was already a recording on acetate of Just How Loud. So Just How Loud's one of these listed tracks. There's a whole lot more, including Where Are My Dreams, Lay Me Down, Wake Me Up.
Yeah, how about that Lay Me Down, Wake Me Up? That seems to be somewhere between Genuine Imitation Life Gazette and Chameleon, in terms of the style of song. But they sort of never, I thought, that might have been the foundation for another album. But
well, Bill Inglett said to me, well, all these songs were all part of what was going to be used for an album called 1970, which Bob Gordy.
Yeah. But then the next, well, actually, according to what I see on the half and half, that Where Are My Dreams, I mean, it didn't make that album, but there's on the CD, it is again included.
Yeah.
The recording date and release date, actually, the recording date precedes the Lay Me Down, even though it was released afterwards. So Where Are My Dreams was their last release on Philips. So I mean that like, again, the style is entirely different. They seem to be they can't settle on one style.
Well, we had 2 versions of One Man. We had You Can't Take It All From a Man, which is a very contrived vocal, but with lots of brass and instrumentation. It's obviously a very full arrangement. And then you've got One Man, as we found on the Mono Master, which is a very urgy sort of group effort, which was again not particularly commercial, although interesting.
Right.
So we have to accept that there's still more to be found out about what happened at the end of the Philips era. But it was clearly they had some good ideas about the direction of their vocal. There was still an element of harmony in the stuff that was there. But this coincided with the breakdown of Bob Crew. But the amazing thing was to find a copy of A New Beginning, recorded in 1970 and done in a country folk style, which puzzled me. And I've got two or three versions of it. So it was clearly a demo, but it was a very there's one very heavy rock version of it. And the only thing I connect it to is Bob Gaudio at the time was pushing a very small label of his own called Gazette, the Gazette. Yeah. And he had half a dozen releases on that, the strongest of which was Happy People with Lock, Stock and Barrel.
Lock, Stock and Barrel. That's a Jersey Shore group, originally called the Chatters. They used to play at the Chatterbox on Seaside Park. Gives you a little local flavor.
Yeah, full of great information. Have you heard the track? Have you heard the track?
No, the Happy People one? No, I never heard that.
Oh, it's a great song. I'll make sure it's posted next week.
I think Mike Petrol actually wrote that too.
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah.
Yeah, I never had the opportunity to hear it though.
For some reason, they picked "You're Ready Now" as a dance floor favorite, and the dancers took to it. So much so that it was bootlegged, and to which Phillips had to respond. So they released it, and it shoots up the charts as a result of radio plays on the pirate stations and everywhere else. So once the ball started rolling in the clubs, it went on to radio and became a hit. So that prompted a tour. Where can we make money? You've got to remember that this time,
they were in debt.
You can confirm it, Anthony, but Tommy DeVito's debts became apparent. And we think that all these things might have been
a factor.
Storm in 69, 70, where what are we going to do about this? Phillips didn't want to know us. We're trying to get records out there. We're still touring as an oldies group. And suddenly, we've got a hit in the UK. Tommy DeVito didn't want to go. Couldn't go. What were the potential reasons for that? Mike, you tell us what you heard about this.
Well, I think I heard what everybody heard over the years, because a lot of our information begins with Rex Woodard.
Yeah.
And, at the time, I'm a year old. So what I learned is that they've used various reasons. He's sick. He's afraid of flying. He had surgery. And then we learned it's probably a little closer to what we learn in Jersey Boys, or what Jersey Boys kind of hints at.
Yeah.
And
they took on the debt.
Oh yeah.
And so I'd read and heard from, I don't know when, that they were just basically performing anywhere and everywhere to pull in money, because obviously, and Frankie talks about this in an interview I'm going to put up, how much money they can make on live dates. And even though they weren't performing to huge crowds, they were still doing the oldies and the universities, and apparently pulling in good money. Even though Tommy left and Bob Grimm came in specifically for the UK tour, and that's a totally weird story, because he comes over for the UK tour, and they immediately do Torquay's Princess Theatre down on the south coast of England, which is a holiday resort. And then they follow up by going to Morgan Studios in Willesden in North London to record tracks with Morgan Sound Studio at Morgan Sound Studios.
We had a bit of a question about that, because I had never heard Bob Grimm play. The only thing I've heard him play is on those Top of the Pops videos from '71 when they were touring, where they do "Let's Hang On" and "I've Got You Under My Skin."
Yeah.
And but then you hear "Sleeping Man," and I couldn't make the connection between what I saw Bob Grimm playing at the Top of the Pops and that guitar on "Sleeping Man." Do you think it was him playing that guitar?
He suggested that he was playing on it, but and I, on the basis of that interview, we've given him credit for that, but I couldn't verify it.
Yeah.
Nor can I find out anything. But then they hit the cabaret scene in February '71 in the UK, and they actually appeared at the Liverpool Empire, my hometown, and I missed it.
What exactly are cabarets in England?
Well,
what's the seating?
Well, the only cabaret club that I know of is the Sheffield Fiesta. Talking to guys who went there, like John Riley, who was the president of the UK fan club in the '70s, and that was a purpose-built club that was designed to pull in big stars, and it seated 1,300. So maybe they had a floor, and then they had seating around,
And I think that would be somewhat equivalent to like dinner theaters in the United States, where like you eat, you have a dinner, and then the entertainment comes on, and they like that usually seats 1,000, 1,500.
1,300 was the design for Sheffield Fiesta. And we have an audience tape copy of the concert there, not in good sound, but it was their usual tour stuff with the medleys thrown in, like Bridge Over Troubled Waters, to just but they did Any Day Now, which was a surprise to UK fans. But obviously they finished with You're Ready Now.
I've never heard them sing that in the United States. I don't think they ever have.
Well, there's 2 shows in the box set that are coming.
Are
there? 2 shows from I think there's '72 and '73. One's Boston Lucifers.
And they did You're Ready Now. Huh.
And another one, Steel Pier. And they did You're Ready Now. I have to say that because they haven't got girl group backings, it sounds pretty dreadful to me. That's just because I love the Jersey Girls, Bernadette, and the Former Angels. But no, they give them a due. They did put on a great show for people, and everybody enjoyed it. And they got a rapturous response from the UK. I wasn't following them at that time. I was qualified and bringing up a young family. Didn't know much about them. They came over again 6 months later, but they'd recorded on the first tour these tracks, and there were 3 tracks recorded at Warner Bros. Because we found the tape. It was in.
What was the third one?
Just Can't Help Believing.
I've never heard of that. I've never heard any reference to that song.
It's the Elvis song, and it's just done in a lightweight folk country version. But it was a stunning find, and incidentally, that song was also listed on the 25 that were done at Philips. So it had already been done at Philips, but the only one that we found with Frankie's vocal on it is the one at Morgan Studios, and the 2 copies of Whatever You Say, Sleeping Man, in stereo that were obviously salvaged and released on CD eventually. But many fans around the world didn't get to hear that at all.
No, well, we just, you talk to the typical person in this country about those 2 songs, and 9,909,000 out of 10,000 people have never heard them.
I know.
They were never used. They were never over here. The only time they've ever been released over here was on the the
They,
Rhino
they
Jersey
didn't,
Boys box set. You know,
they didn't seem to fit the group or
no, they were
style.
just out totally outside the box.
They were
But
just
as you point out, uh, it goes along with their experimentation of what to go, and maybe they were trying to, maybe it was their view of what would motivate
Northern Soul
the
scene. Yeah,
Northern
right.
Soul market.
Unless you were one of 50 lucky individuals in 1973 who knew Stuart Miller, and
On
were
that
part of
UK
the
fan club bootleg.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
he only made 50 of them, so there must
50.
have been 50 fans. I'm trying to find out what the fan club membership was in the UK and US about this time, because clearly it wasn't significant. But to give them their due, they did these 2 tours, and on the second tour, I was told by George Ingram that in an interview, Bob Gaudio had said he wrote a number of the tracks for the Chameleon album while they were on tour.
Do you remember who the 4 seasons were on the second tour? Because it wouldn't have included Bob Grimm, right?
Didn't include Bob Grimm, but I think
Who-
Dimitri Callis.
Dimitri Callis was
Yeah.
there then.
He was replaced after that first UK tour.
Yeah, and so Dimitri
Bob Grimm
Callis
stayed in the UK, obviously got a girl pregnant and decided to stay and be a father, and he was offered a recording deal with Morgan Studios. So
Yeah.
I have a funny story about that, where he, when I asked him if he was the guy that's on Sleeping Man, he just gave me a roundabout answer, because I don't even know if he was sure himself, but he said,
He couldn't. He didn't refer to the names of the songs.
he didn't. No, and the reason is because after that interview, he emailed me back, and because in the interview I asked him about the Morgan recordings and Sleeping Man and Whatever You Say in particular, and he emails me back and he said something to the effect of, "Where did you hear these Morgan recordings? Where can I get a hold of them?" I said, "Well, there are no quote unquote Morgan recordings per se. I was just I refer to them as the Morgan recordings in the book." So he says, "Well, what do you have? What did you hear?" I said, "Well, there's these 2 songs, Sleeping Man and Whatever You Say, because they came out later on CD." He's like, "Well, I don't remember any of the song titles, but he says, Bobby kept me in the studio for pretty much the whole time I was there." And he asked me to send it to him. So I sent him a copy of Sleeping Man. I never heard from him again, but that's,
he's still around, so maybe that's another little thread that we can close down in the future. I'll follow that up in the next week or 2. So there we are. The group had been booked to play in the Talk of the Town in London, but there was no London date possible because of clashes. And they returned to the US 4th of October. Well, they actually signed for Motown in October, and they were in the studio that month. So the story of how that happened, and what we know about it, and about, we're not really sure who put them in touch with Berry Gordy, but that's something I'll need to delve down and find out. But Berry Gordy was keen to sign them. So that's the point we've reached, the end of the Phillips era. There's still probably unreleased tracks from this period, but we know that we chased down all that we could find, and they're all in the forthcoming box set, which is due out in April next year. And I also have a number of different alternative versions and alternative takes of those unreleased and unfound, including a very different vocal version of Lay Me Down, Wake Me Up, which has Frankie singing a very different, a very uncomfortable outro vocal, which doesn't match the one that was actually eventually found on the long version. I also have the short mono version 45, but that long stereo version runs 6 minutes 11 seconds.
But that's just the backup singers. on that long outro. I don't think Frankie even sings it.
Well, they start making mistakes, so they stopped the recording. At 6 minutes 11 seconds, the guitarist was getting the notes wrong, so they edited it to the version that we've got, and that was a very different Four Seasons, and will be uniquely the most rock-oriented Four Seasons, and a song that Mark likes a lot, don't you, Mark?
Yeah.
Lay Me Down. And
good horns on that.
It's a great.
Did Charlie Clow arrange that?
It's just sexy as well, you know. Every now and again you need a song to just be sexy.
The refrains and
well,
lyrics.
Yeah, I mean, is it the Four Seasons trying to be Stones like? Or which other group would they be imitating? Where did it possibly come from? How did Bob Crew dream it up? Bob Gaudio.
Everything between 68 and 72 is a group going through a severe identity crisis.
Yeah, and same with Gaudio and Crew, and a number of people who maybe worked with them. And of course, we have then a complete change. This was the start of the change that would lead to Who Loves You, because the collapse of Philips would lead to Motown, and Motown would inevitably fine-tune everything to lead to My Eyes Adored You and Who Loves You. And so that's the path we'll take in future sessions. Obviously, with Lee joining in 73, he's going to have to be back for
that. I spent 4 years in Philadelphia when I was at med school there, and I saw the Four Seasons every year while I was there because they were popular in Philadelphia. And I remember the first year, which would have been like late 69, early 70, it was the same lineup. You know, it was Frankie, Bob, Tommy, and Joe Long. Then the next year when I saw them, which would have been 71, Tommy was gone, and Dimitri Callis was replacing him. Then the next year, which was 72, Bob Gaudio was gone, and there was this fellow named Bill DeLoach, who was the keyboardist who took Bob Gaudio's place. But then I saw them in 73, and I don't think he was there. I can't remember.
Well, it was a revolving door.
Yeah.
Four Seasons.
I don't know if Lee Shapiro. I remember. Too bad Lee's not here. When he joined, and Frankie introduces them, and he says, "And now our new keyboardist," and he said Lee Shapiro, and that sort of struck me. I wasn't used to hearing a Shapiro with the Four Seasons.
Anthony, a few years back, I saw Frankie in AC, and Bill DeLoach came back. So he's been in and out over the years. Yeah, so he's still around on and off.
Yeah, he didn't stay initially very long because after 1 year he seemed to have disappeared. But I know he's come back intermittently.
According to Woodard,
we'll pick on
Woodard. There was like some sort of a falling out.
We'll pick up on it next time. But Lee is nothing but complimentary to the guitar playing of Dimitri Callis. And it was a revolving door of Four Seasons between 71 and 73.
Yeah, I remember they made him sing a few songs, sing lead on a few songs, Dimitri Callis. So it's sort of surprised. I think he did that Stephen Sills song, "Love the One You're With."
Yeah. That's on the box. There's going to be on the box set on a live performance. That's one of the shows that we've got from that period. But,
I was going to say, in that 73 song, in that 73 concert, they introduced a lot of non-Four Seasons songs. Like you mentioned, what was the one? They did "If" and "Bridge Over Troubled Waters" and "The Way We Were." I don't know if Lee had anything to do with arranging
those. Lee wanted them out when he came in. He inherited them because Charlie Clelland had done some of these arrangements.
Okay.
I Got Love, which was done in 1970 after the Purdy musical.
Pearly.
That was a show opener. And so it always picked up the audience a bit because it drives along at quite a pace. But one of the things that maybe there's so much to explore in the forthcoming years. There's a bit of a disconnect between the live Four Seasons and the Motown Four Seasons as we begin to see them now.
Yeah.
And the one thing I must tell you is that I've just completed a review of the unreleased Motown tracks that we had discovered in paper records, and what all that was supplied to Universal Motown and to Bob Gaudio during the box set. And we weren't party to, and we were not shared any of the research that was done. So I have written up all of the songs that are listed and the tapes that they're on and where they should be, and highlighted the ones that exist and completed and have got a Motown master number, the ones that are being released, the 13. And you're going to be gobsmacked when you see the list. But anybody who goes in there now can go to a tape and can say, listen to this tape and find me this song, because it's on that tape somewhere. And it's approaching 30.
Yeah.
We're getting 13. So all of that I will publish in due course. Don't know when, but I'm not criticizing anybody. I've been asked not to criticize anybody in the Snapper project, and I won't, because we all did our very best. And not least of all, the late Bob Fisher, who worked tirelessly with me. But to me, it's the cornerstone of our Four Seasons that came next. And so I'm very interested in talking through the Motown period and us analysing the sessions, the tracks, what we know from what we've heard. So thanks guys. Pity we didn't have a full complement this time. I know Dominic and Lee and Chuck have been missed and will have been sad to have missed out on tonight, but we needed to cover this period. I had all the information that we've been able to find, so sharing that with you as I've shared it in the collector's notes in the box set, and hopefully they'll still be there when it comes out. And so
as long as you don't criticize.
As long as I don't criticize anybody, particularly not Bob Gaudio.
Yeah.
I've already had one cease and desist notice from him in 1997. So,
yeah.
But it was all down to Peter Bennett, I say, and he's no longer here. So
he has that down to a fine an art form, right? The cease and desist order.
Yeah, he was a specialist in them. So thanks, guys. Thanks, Mark, for setting this session up, and I'll edit it and put it up as soon as possible. But look out for the WCAU interview, which is coming up. It's really interesting and a good sum up of what we've discussed to date in terms of the way they created the sound and what Frankie was aiming for in 1974. So have a good day, rest of the day, you guys. I'll put some food on now.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
And get better.
Okay. Thanks, guys. And you look after yourself, Mike, and get over that.
Everybody get better.
Right. Yes, everyone
get better.
Everyone.
And let's hope the economies of the world and everything else improve as well.
Yes.
Take care, guys.
Take care, guys. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.